right, we all good to get going. Gradually, we're losing people tonight, so thank you for sticking around. A bit of the survival of the fittest, I think. For those who don't know me, my name's Katie. I work with this lot at Billu, but I'm also a Google developer expert in Android. So as usual, I'm here to talk about Android and specifically Jetpack Compose because it's my latest favorite thing. So I'm going to talk to you about previews and how you can make them powerful. So put up your hand here if you've done some Android development before. Do you? And have you guys done Jetpack Compose? Only a couple. So a few people new to Jetpack Compose. So I thought I would do a little check and just let you know what Jetpack Compose is so that you kind of understand what I'm talking about. So Jetpack Compose is the declarative UI toolkit for Android. So this is a way of building UIs for Android. If you've done it a long time in the past, you would have been using the old view-based system, which was a lot of XML files, less fun. Jetpack Compose is the new shiny way of doing things. It's written in Kotlin. It's pretty efficient and flexible. If you have done some Flutter development, it's quite similar. So something that I've been working on is a little app just to share QR codes. Very simple. And so for the demonstration today, I'm just using one of the composables that I've written, and it's a little tile. It shows a bit of text, an icon, and when you flip it over, there's a QR code. And this is just a building block that I'm going to use in the rest of my app. And this is a composable. So just to talk to you about what a composable is, it's a function. I'm calling mine side details, just what I've got here. And yes, I did choose to dress to match my composables. Bit weird. And this has a composable annotation. So this tells me that it's a composable. I can use it as part of my UI. I have some parameters in here, so passing in the details I'm going to display on the screen, including some formatting like my background, content color. I've got a card and a column just controlling the layout. And then I've got what is actually inside here, which is an image, some spacing, some text. All of these equate to what you see on the screen. And these are also composables. So in Jetpack Compose, it's composables all the way down. Pretty much everything is a composable. You just make things of other composables. So everything's a building block. So what's a preview then? So a preview is a way that you can see your composable while you're doing the development. So we can see here in Android Studio, I've got my code on the left. Code on the right. Left, that's right. And the display on the other side with what my composable looks like. And that's the preview. So here's the content I'm passing in, just some sample data so that I can see what it looks like. And I've got a modifier as well, so I can adjust how this is displaying. In this case, I'm limiting it to an aspect ratio of 1 to make it a square. I've applied a theme for my app so that I can make sure I've got the coloring and the typography correct. I've got a function name, and this is a composable too. Everything is a composable. And I've got the preview annotation. And this is what I'm going to be talking a lot about today. So the preview annotation is what tells Android Studio to show my preview to the side of my code. So why do we care about previews? Why am I going to spend this time up here talking about them? It's a way of looking at your UI without having to deploy on a device or an emulator. You can do it straight from the IDE, and it's a lot easier. You don't have to set up an emulator. You don't have to connect your phone. Much easier. You can also display lots of previews with different configurations. So you can see how your UI will display with lots of different devices, different device settings, and you can look at all of them at once. So you don't have to continually get your app into that position. You don't have to navigate through your app and log into a particular user or change the device settings, because that takes a lot of time. And using previews is a lot faster. All these things make your development time faster, means you can build a lot of your UI without ever testing it on a device, and make sure that everything looks great from the get-go. And Android Studio has a lot of things to help you. So back to my composable, I can hover my mouse over the preview, and it will show me all the composables it's made up of. And I can click through and find the definition of these. So in this case, I could click on my website bit and it would take me to that text that displays the website. It also shows me the boundaries of all the composables and the UI elements. So I can take a look at my spacing. Have I got the right pixel perfect adjustment in there? Do I need to add some more space? If something overflowed, where would it go? So I can use it to check this. Previously to this, you might have to deploy this on a device, then go into the settings, into developer settings, and change it to show layout bounds so you can see all this on the device, which, if anybody's done that before, several steps. We don't want to have to do that every time. I can also go and copy this image and use this in things like Figma designs or flow diagrams, which would be quite useful. One irritating thing is when I copy this image, I can't, for some reason, include it in Google Slides, which is really, really irritating, especially as I'm going to talk a lot about these pictures. And I think the formatting, it just doesn't work in Google Slides, which is disappointing. But hopefully they get there. So I can also make updates to my composable in my preview and see that reflected live. So as I change the text here, I can see this update. Add some other text, and that appears. You can turn this on and off in Android Studio, depending on what your preference is. If you want it to allow live edit, you can do that. You can also let it update on save, on press of a hotkey, or you can opt out of doing that. I can even change the color of the background, and that will be immediately reflected. Yeah. There are some not so great things. With a preview, you can't have any network access. So you can't like go and get data and do anything like that. There's no file access, so you can't go look at a JSON file. And some of the context APIs are unavailable. And sometimes I have noticed the previews break with external data structures. I think it just gets a bit flaky, and it depends how you've set up your project. So the message from this is that previews need to be standalone. We're just showing the UI. We're not showing the logic. We're not showing the view model. We're not showing the nav controllers. So you don't want to include those in your previews. You just want to show the UI, the pretty pictures. But you do want to pass in data so that you can see different states and make sure that you are displaying your UI in lots of different states so you can play with it. So remember, we also don't want to include our previews as part of deployed code, because then we might accidentally put some of our sample data into our app, which we don't want. And a really helpful tip here is if you do have a lot of previews, is include preview as part of the name. That way, when you are doing a pull request and code review with your friends, they will see that you're trying to use a preview in deployed code and say, hang on a second, why have we got this here? You technically can, because they are composables, so you can include them as part of other composables. And you can also have previews that include other previews, which can be useful, but can also get confusing. So talking about the preview annotation, this is just the basics. So back to the preview I had before. Get rid of the center stuff. We don't really care about that. So we can see that with the name that I've included for my function, it links up to the name that's shown with my preview, so I can easily see where that is. But if I have a couple of these previews, it might get hard to see that. I can add things like a human readable name. My function name might not make much sense, but I can have something more simple like front and back. I can also add a group. So when you do have lots of previews, in this example, I've only got 2, but in my production app right now, one of my files has 158 previews. So I need to be able to group these into different sections so that I can look at them. I can group them based on their functionality, on the conditions I'm checking, or just into logical groups based on my app. So I've got one here for tile, so I can just filter on just the tiles. I can also set the height and the width of the preview. So I can see how my composable will fit if I've restricted the size that it's allowed to be. So we can see here that I've set a height of 300 and a width of 500. So my composable's cut off. I'm filling the width in my composable. I'm not adjusting for the height, so it just gets cut off. So when I look at this preview, I'd say, oh, I've made a mistake. I need to adjust my composable so that it fits nicely within the bounds. I could also show a background. And this might be useful if you've got a composable that has rounded corners. I can see that a lot easier with this white background here. I can also set different colors and see how my composable looks against different things. For example, with the color blue set as the background, I can see that this choice of red is not great if it's going to be on a blue background. And interestingly, these values have to be compile time stable. So it means I can't use just color blue. I have to actually use the long value, which, believe it or not, as StudioBot told me, that is what blue is in long. I don't know why. I can also use my preview in showing the system UI. So I can see what my preview would look like if it was on a device. In this case, my preview expands to fill the sides, so it's rather large. You can see at the top here, we have the status bar. I don't really know why you would want to see the status bar at the top, but it might be useful if you're going to use this as screenshots to use on your App Store listing or as part of a Figma flow diagram or something like that. You might want it to look more like a device. So having the status bar with some sample stuff in there, it can be quite useful. You can also see that we have the full length here and that my composable doesn't fill the full length. It only fills the width and it sits at the top. So we've got lots of extra space there. This will also enable you, if your composable is longer, you can see how it would scroll. I can also further restrict that height and width. In this case, I've made a different type of rectangle, and you can see that I end up with some space above and below. So I can see, is this what I want for my composable? So that's sort of the basic stuff. Most people, if you've played with Jetpack Compose Previews before, you've probably already used those. But we can go into a few more interesting things. So looking at device configuration. So back to my preview, like before, I can have multiple preview annotations for the same preview. So I can keep adding these preview annotations and it will generate more and more previews. I don't have to copy and paste the same setup function. So in this case, I'm using different font scales. So it's behaving as if I had my device and I changed the font scale to small, medium, large, extra large. I've given different names to make sure that I can identify which font scale I'm looking at. And I've given the values, which in this case, we've got 0.85%, 1.15%, and 130%. So this generates 4 previews for me. We can see that we've got the small one here, larger one, extra large. We can see that definitely I have not built my composable well because it doesn't flow nicely, doesn't truncate my text, and you really need to work on that before I release this app. And if you're curious, you can also lay out your composables and your previews using grids as opposed to the lists, which can be really helpful if you're looking at a lot of small components, so you can see them all at once. So when I've got all these, I can then create a annotation class to group all these preview annotations together and reuse them. So it means I can create lots of previews for all the different scenarios. So I can use the same annotation class for the front previews and the back previews. This is using the multi-preview API. And just on the font scales in particular, there is another preview annotation coming, which is preview font scale. It's currently in alpha, but you can go and grab that rather than building your own. I can also look at and see what my composable looks like in day and night mode by passing in the UI mode. So interestingly, it's UI mode night no and UI mode night yes. I would have expected maybe true and false there, so it's a bit weird to say yes and no, but that's what we've got. We can see that my previews here, I've got in the day mode, it's dark, and in the night mode, it's light. Possibly I've got a mistake here. I need to fix this up. But if I hadn't looked at this beforehand, I would have to go and set that in my device. So by being able to see this side by side, I can consider I've got a problem to fix. There's lots of other UI modes available to you. I haven't played around with all of these yet. There's for different types like car and desk mode, which I'm curious about. Appliance mode is what I really want to try out and see what happens. No idea what happens there. Also VR headset. And there's watch as well. So you can see how your composable will display on different types of devices. You can also have a look at those devices and how your composable would lay out on those using the device annotation here. So if you've looked at some of my talks in the past, I have done one on this watch app, and it really shows this here. So you can see that my layout looks really nice on the small Wear OS device, but on the large one, it looks okay. On the rectangle and the square one, I really need to update my UI. It doesn't look good. So by being able to use all of these previews, I can see this straight up and make my modifications and use that live edit to make sure it looks good on all of the previews. I can also look at the using the wallpaper theming. So I can use the Android feature that allows you to change your UI of your app based on the device colors the user has set. So you can have some examples here where you're using wallpaper samples that are green dominated, red dominated, blue dominated, and yellow dominated. So I can see roughly what my composable would look like and make sure that my color contrast is good. There's also an interactive mode. So this is where you can go and click to start the interactive mode in your preview and just start playing around with it. So I can check out my animation. I can see what happens on click. In this case, I'm using the full tile preview that has both sides. And this could be quite good. Again, you don't have to go and navigate to that specific part of your app. You can see how this behaves standalone. There's also, you can run this on an emulator or on a physical device. So I can run just the preview. It runs side by side and that live edit capability is still there as well. And I can interact with it just like I did in the preview. You can also debug your animations. I've grabbed some GIFs off the developer documentation because it's a little bit more complex than my animation, but you can have a look at how they behave over time and play around with it, see if there are any bugs, tweak the settings. You can do this straight from your preview without ever having to deploy it on an actual device. One of the other really powerful things is parameterized previews. This is how I get to 158 previews. I don't write 158 previews. I just have a lot of different parameters. So again, we have our preview composable and we pass in a parameter. Now previews can only take one parameter and one parameter only, and that is a preview parameter. What this is we have a provider for this. This has a data model with it. It could just be something like a string or an integer, or you can create your own data model using a data class, like I've got at the top there, tile preview data. I have a tile name preview parameter provider, and this will allow me to provide a sequence of values that will provide my data to my preview. So we can see here I've got a few different examples. I've got a short name, I've got a very, very long name, another short name, but then with long content. So I can see how my composable behaves with all these different combinations. Then we pass it into the app, and then I can reference that data straight into the in the preview here. You can see my example here. Some of these look okay. Other ones, I'm chopping off the text. I need to look into that. I can also look at providing formatting, so such as my background color here. Now, you might look at this and this looks pretty good. I've got a background color. I've got this in my preview parameter. It looks really good. The trouble is that this color blue works, but the material color scheme primary value doesn't work. When you look at this in Android Studio, you get an error saying that the composable invocations can only happen from the context of a composable function. And that's because the material theme is a composable. And the preview parameter provider is not. So it means we can't access composables inside things that are not composables. So this was really irritating for me because I wanted to be able to do this, especially if you're using theming and other things like that. So you can use a Kotlin functional interface to be able to achieve this. So you create your data class, which contains all your information. I could include a lot more parameters in here if I wanted to. I have to create the functional interface, and this takes in a composable value. That's the composable, so it allows me to use my themed value. I then have my preview data, and this I can create as objects here. So I've got blue and I've got primary. So these are actually functions, to be honest, but they're referenced here to separately, and then I can pass them in as a sequence here. So these are no longer composables, they're references to these. I'm sort of getting around it a little bit. So then when I reference in my preview, I can use the data value function to go fetch that actual value. So kind of getting around the whole composables inside other composables thing. And this works then. So I've got the solid blue then, and I've got my primary color, which in this case is my themed color. So you can use previews for testing. This is what we want to do. I'm going to make sure our app looks really good on all these different devices. So we can do UI checks. And this is really helpful if you want to make sure your app is accessible. So we can start UI check mode and have a look at our composable in all these different scenarios. Now, some of these are ones that I've just demonstrated that you can create manually, but you can also create these automatically through Android Studio. It does obviously take a few minutes or a few seconds to go click this and load these up. So you might only do this for your edge cases. You might have your previews all set up for things you want to check frequently, but this might just be something you go and check before you complete something. So here we have different font scaling. We have also different devices and how your preview displays here. So in this case, I've got some tablets here, phone setups, landscape, portrait, light and dark mode. But what's important is it's also checking things like my color contrast. So in this example here, I've changed my color to gray, and it's telling me that doesn't have a good color contrast ratio. So that's something I need to go fix. There's also colorblind modes. So if you're somebody who does have good color vision and you don't suffer from colorblind disadvantage, you can go and check what it might look like for someone who does suffer from color blindness. And there's lots of different variations, so you can go check each one and make sure that your contrast and any symbology looks okay for those people. That's really helpful. And I'm always quite surprised by what things look like for people who are differently colorblind. There's also a SDK called Showcase. And this is from Airbnb, and this is super helpful with your previews. It's an annotation processor based, so it's going to process my previews. And it turns these previews into browsable components. And you might think, why do I need this? I can look at these in Android Studio anytime I like. But this is a great tool to share your previews with non-technical folk. So you like your designers or your product owners, if you want to show them what something looks like, again, without having to navigate through the app and set up specific data conditions. It will generate different configurations, for example, different text sizes, right to left layouts, those sorts of things. And it's automated. There's a GitHub link for that as well. So what does this look like? So in my app, I've got a little icon in the corner there, and this will launch the Showcase browser. So this shows all the previews I've currently got in my app. It's showing them in different configurations. So I've got the grid down here, that's another preview. So I could show this to my designer and say, do these look okay to you? He'd probably say no. It's done very quickly. And if we go and have a look at my form here, you can see we've got light and dark mode, different text sizes, right to left, left to right, and I can see what it looks like. And that was all automated. And it's pretty simple to set up. So the steps to set up, you just need to add the dependency, pretty straightforward. You can just add this class to the root module. It's just making sure that Showcase is aware of your module. And then you need to call the activity, and you can just start it as any regular activity in Android. And this would give you that little action that allows you to show this browser. A real big tip is make sure you only enable this in debug mode or for your variants that your test team will be using. You don't want to show your end user this browser. They wouldn't know what to do with it. They can't interact with it. And it might show some bad data or something like that. So you really want to put a debug flag around this to make sure you only turn it on when you need it. You can also do snapshot testing with previews. So if you are used to working with Android and used to working with apps, you might know about UI testing. So UI testing, it's not necessarily for the visual aspect of the component. It's usually what things are on the screen. It doesn't really check usually, are the things the right colors? Are they the right layout? But it does tell you, oh, these things are on the screen and I can interact with them. But UI testing is generally slow to execute and can be super costly if you're using it on your CI and every minute you have to pay for. It requires quite a complex setup. If you have done some UI testing before and automated UI testing, it takes a long time and you've got to keep updating those tests. It costs a lot of money. But you can use it to test things like interaction bugs and scrolls and clicks and things like that. Now, what is snapshot testing? This tests the visual UI. This is something that looks to see if, is this pixel exactly aligned? Are these two pieces of text in the right spot? Are they the right color? And it can produce visual diffs. So you can look at things side by side and see if they look the same or look different. And they run like unit tests. So you don't need to use the emulator. They don't take as long as UI testing does. It won't cost you as much money. It's pretty quick, fast. And it allows you to test the visual bugs, the styling and the spacing and the theme. So you can use both of these things. But snapshot testing really makes use of previews. Some of these visual bugs we might look for are changes from libraries. So if I go and update Jetpack Compose, they might decide to change how particular text might be rendered or how a particular icon might work. And I might not notice this when I'm just developing my app. It might be out into the users and I wouldn't even notice. But if I've got running snapshot testing on it, it will alert me that a change has been made. It checks things like styling, padding, margins, colors, and themes. And lots of layout edge cases like long text, constraints. You can, as I said, check out the internationalization, accessibility, and all these things we show in previews. So if you're doing snapshot testing, you have two steps. You record the test. So you're taking a snapshot of each of the components and store it as a reference for verification. So we're going to store what our previews look like. And then you want to verify. So you want to compare the last snapshot against the current changes and see if they match. So an example of this is side-by-side comparison. So you can see I've got these two composables here, and one of them I've changed some text, the other one I've changed a bit of the padding. You can see that we have in the center, it's highlighting which parts have changed. So I can look at this and say, is that changed what I wanted, or have I made a mistake? I can also hook this up to GitHub Actions. So it means I can put a little comment in my GitHub PR that will say, hold on, you've changed some of the UI. Is this okay? Merge in the changes or go back and fix it. There are many libraries to do this. I'm currently using Paparazzi from Cash App in my current production app, but there's a whole bunch of other ones. Some of them are easier to set up than others. Paparazzi I found quite useful. And there has been some news that there might be one coming directly from Google. It was talked about, I think, in Google during the Google I/O videos. Still yet to actually see it, but hopefully it comes soon because I'd rather use a first-party library. But I do believe it's quite similar to RoboRazzi if you're trying that one out. I did want to go into how to implement snapshot testing, but it is quite complex and I'm running a bit low on time. So hopefully in the future. But I'll include some links at the end with some good implementations you can follow. So now you've got the power to use your previews and make them really fast and help them improve your UI and your app development experience. Here's some useful links. So there's the official docs here. Some interesting ones on dynamic color. A lot of people might not know about this. Showcase and Paparazzi. This blog here from Paparazzi about how to use Paparazzi and Showcase together. Works really well. I've got a few blog posts on previews as well. So check those out if you're interested. Photos. Any questions?
A bit of a daft question.
Nice.
I'm not too sure if there's much of a need for it either, but does the composable allow for like responsive kind of attributes? So if the screen size is varied, is that like 50% width or?
Yes, absolutely, yes. Using those modifiers, I glossed over it briefly there. Not important for the overall story, but with Jetpack Compose, you can use modifiers, and they can do things like width 60%, for example. You can also do more responsive things that will respond more to the state of the screen. So you can look at like the height and width of the screen as that gets changed. You can then do other things. If the width goes smaller, you can turn the component blue, something like that. Just depends what you want to do.
Yes.
Any other questions?
When you the packet with the vehicles,
Mhm.
takes the UI difference. Does it show you this?
Yeah, so the one that I've used, which was Paparazzi, it will give me these. So these different.
Show you the difference.
Yeah, so it will give me the new screenshot and will also give me this diff so that I can use that. It also, I didn't include it here, but it also gives me a nice HTML report with which failed, which passed, that sort of thing, so I can use that. You can do different things depending on your implementation. Excuse me one moment. What was your question?
As far as connecting, something that's
Which in particular?
in particular, any changes that you've made, adding to share.
Sorry, I still don't understand your question.
So you've got 3 visuals there.
Yeah.
I want to back later and my front across my guys. Can you add any kind of notes?
Oh, well, you can add code comments, of course, and say, yeah, this does this or this sort of thing. I've seen. Oh, it's just normal code comments you could do. I have seen some examples, and I've not played around with them with myself, of some third-party hooks into GitHub or into your code base, which will actually take these screenshots and give you a history over time, so you can go back, and say, what did things look like in March, for example. I think you have to pay a little bit for storage space because you have to store a lot of images. I've looked into those briefly, but I haven't found the need yet, just because in my team, we're putting this onus on the developers to look at this and go, oh, this has changed. I need to go and get a sign off from the UX team and verify that this is correct. Because once you've gone, this is correct, and you've merged in the new changes, that's kind of the current state.
Yeah.
That makes sense? So it depends how you set up your app. So if your app is just changing your theme, so looking different colors and styles, and you've got 2 different themes, you can apply those different themes in your previews. So you could have a preview that is contained with another one. That containing preview could have the theme. You could also use that parameterized previews and pass in your theme, or pass in data that sets your composable to whichever of your 2 types of app. So you could say, use alpha version, use beta version, for example. There's a few different ways to do it, and it depends how you've set up your app. But yeah, you can still use the same preview to generate all those different versions. And that can be really helpful, because then you can see side by side, this version looks great. Oh no, this version doesn't look good. I have to go and make sure I can get them both to look good.